Chris Mannix for the crossover alongside Howard Beck and Michael Shapiro. Guys, LaMarcus Aldridge has announced his retirement because of a heart issue. Of course, we wish him well. But now the debate begins as to whether LaMarcus Aldridge is a Hall of Famer. Howard, I'll start with you. Is Aldridge worthy of the Hall of Fame?
Well, Chris, at a time like this, when a guy is stepping away, and especially when he's had a really nice career the way LaMarcus Aldridge has, the temptation is to be, I think, overly charitable and say, oh, sure, of course he is. He's a 7-time All-Star. He made 5 All-NBA teams. But you look a little closer, it's not really a very strong case. He averaged 19 and 8 for his career with about a block a game. He finishes 62nd all-time in rebounds and 51st all-time in points scored. And when it comes to NBA players, you always have to take into account, look, it's more than the NBA. It's the Basketball Hall of Fame. Well, he doesn't have those other credentials. He didn't play in the Olympics. He didn't have some glowing NCAA tournament run to bolster his case. He was a really good, solid player, never made first-team All-NBA, was never in an MVP discussion. He was never part of some really super memorable team that made a big impact. I always say, if nothing else, ask this question. Can you talk about this player's era of the NBA, the story of that era, without that player? And yes, you can. You can tell the story of the last 15 years of the NBA without LaMarcus Aldridge, I'm sorry to say. He was really, really good, but Hall of Fame, I'd say that's a stretch.
I don't want to go ahead and be accused of homerism here with my former fellow Longhorn, but I will say that for the Basketball Hall of Fame, Marcus Aldridge has a pretty fair case, in my opinion. 5 All-NBA honors, that's nothing to sneeze at. He was just shy of 20,000 points. He obviously would have crossed that if not for the medical issue. He was a really strong player for about a decade here. And again, this isn't the MLB Hall of Fame. This isn't the NFL Hall of Fame. The Basketball Hall of Fame is pretty relaxed in terms of its standards. I mean, Mitch Richmond is a Hall of Famer. I think Aldridge is kind of one of those similar players where, sure, you could accuse him of being a compiler, but the end of that Portland tenure, the first 2 years in San Antonio, if Kawhi Leonard's foot doesn't get stepped on, perhaps they would have beat the Warriors and advanced to the finals with Aldridge. He had some big, big years. Now, I'm not exactly going to be pounding the table for his induction. I think it's a fringe case, but I kind of feel like the Basketball Hall of Fame, if it's close, let him in. That's my vote here.
Yeah, Howard, if your pal Chris Webber gets in, I know you've been banging that drum for a while. I think LaMarcus Aldridge becomes that next guy that we wonder, will he get in? Won't he get in? Will he be that guy that we say is, the bar for players to at least cross to ultimately get in? He does have a compelling case statistically. As Michael said, just shy of 20,000 points. Most of the players that have crossed that threshold are in the Hall of Fame. 5 All-NBA nods. 6 is kind of the magic number, so he's just a little bit short there. He was never the best player at his position, so I think that kind of works against him. And I think what works against him the most, Howard, is not that he didn't have this decorated college career, but that he didn't have a ton of playoff success. His teams in Portland and San Antonio, more often than not, they didn't really advance very far. He didn't have a ton or many notable playoff games. And this is one of those situations where even though he wasn't going to be the star of the Brooklyn Nets, if the Nets win a championship this year and Aldridge had been playing, he would have played a substantial role. So if he had won a title in Brooklyn, I think that would have enhanced his chances to get into the Hall of Fame down the line. But Howard, I think it's very borderline. I think the playoffs may be his biggest obstacle to getting in.
Yeah, I think so too. Look, those teams he was on in Portland, paired first with Brandon Roy, then with Dame Lillard, those teams were about Brandon Roy and then Dame Lillard. Like LaMarcus Aldridge was the second most important player on those teams, but those teams never made it past the second round. In fact, they got to the second round once. Then he goes to San Antonio where he makes the conference finals once and the second round one other time. So there aren't a bunch of deep playoff runs, memorable playoff moments to really define his Hall of Fame case. As I say, there's nothing outside of the NBA, whether Olympics or college. So there's really just not a very compelling case. The stats are nice, but look, it's a sliding scale, right? You either have really dominant, super great stats, but maybe you didn't make the finals or win a championship, but you make it on your individual effort. Or the inverse can be true. In a case like LaMarcus Aldridge, the stats are solid, but not spectacular, but would be bolstered if he had played a key role on a finals team or on a championship team. Sadly for him, that didn't happen. You're right. It might have been able to happen this season with the Nets. Unfortunately, we'll never know. And I'll just leave you with this. For what it's worth, Basketball References algorithm that estimates a guy's Basketball Hall of Fame chances has LaMarcus Aldridge at exactly 50%.
So just like us, the Basketball Hall of Fame or Basketball Reference is walking that fine line. I'm sure we'll be discussing this for years to come. For more, check us out over at SI.com.